Yes guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Brad if you haven't seen me before. And the season is finally finished for Sheffield United. Of course we've finished 13th. The first thing I'm going to do in this video is look at the season as a whole, see what went wrong and went right. Then we're going to rank the transfers from the best to the worst. And then we'll give a few awards out at the end, including goal of the season, player of the season, young player of the season. As always, if you're new around here, leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel. And also go and follow my socials, links in the caption to my TikTok, my Instagram and my X. I post a lot more short form content on there about Sheffield United, about football in general. There's going to be plenty of content on here and on the short form pages regarding the World Cup in the summer. So do stick around, subscribe to the channel, give them a follow if you don't want to miss out. I think the best place to start is of course the beginning of the season, the Sellers era. It was definitely a short era but not a sweet one. As you can see on the screen now, these are 6 games that Sellers took charge of. Of course no wins, no draws, 6 losses. And of course shortly after that Ipswich game he did get the sack. I just want to quickly catch your eye on that Bristol City game because the first half we actually looked decent. Of course you can see the stats here and the momentum chart. We was on a lot of the ball and we were creating a lot of chances, but of course them chances didn't amount to anything. We lost 4-1. We did concede some sloppy goals, but of course we should have scored to ourselves. And that first half in the Bristol City game is really where the Sellers era peaked. Of course the only other goal we scored on the Sellers was a Harmer halfway line goal. And I mean that's saying something. We couldn't score near the box, we had to go from the halfway line. In the Swansea, Millwall or Borough games they were quite close but we just couldn't score. It really got bad in that Ipswich game. Of course we lost 5-0. And I've got to say it's probably one of the darkest points of the season. Of course the owners then made the move to sack Sellers and bring Wilder back in. And after just 3 months out of the job, Chris Wilder was the manager of Sheffield United for a 3rd time. Of course in the first 6 games under Wilder we managed to get 3 wins under our belt. Don't get me wrong, there were some disappointing results like that one to Charlton last minute at home. At Oxford away though, we managed to break the duck, get the 3 points in the bag, the first of the season. There were some very questionable calls in that Southampton game. Of course we lost 2-1, we was leading 1-0 though. And this was the start of the problem we've had all season of losing points from winning positions. The next game after that was a poor performance at Hull. We could have been saved with a penalty, but of course Burrows missed in the 88th minute. But then we managed to get 2 wins in a row. Of course the first one being a scrappy 1-0 win against Watford. I seem to remember it wasn't the best game, it was bundling over the line for the goal. But at that stage of the season with how we was playing, of course 3 points was necessary no matter how. And then against Blackburn that was a decent turnaround, of course losing 1-0 in the first half, winning 3-1 in the end. And it felt like after them 2 wins we'd pick up a bit of momentum, of course try to push them playoffs. Because it was only early in the season, of course we were getting a couple of wins under our belt. And there was still plenty of time to salvage the season. Of course look at Southampton, they were in a similar position about January. But then the next 3 games of course we lose to Preston, Derby and Coventry. The Preston one in particular was quite frustrating because of course we were 2-0 up just before half time. Of course on the stroke of half time Preston get that goal back that sparks a comeback. And then of course we can see just after half time another problem we've had all season. There's been a lot of games this season between the 45th and the 60th minute where we concede 1 or 2. And I think that really underlines the problems that we did have this season. Of course Preston completed the comeback by the 58th minute, we were down and out. And then the next game at Bramall Lane, of course a Carlton Morris hat-trick sealed the deal for Derby. And then away to eventual champions Coventry, of course we went 1-0 but we couldn't hold on for dear life. We succumbed to pressure and then of course losing 3-1. But then this is where the form actually starts to take a bit of a turn for the better. Of course going unbeaten in the next 6 including 4 wins and 2 draws. A forgettable 0-0 draw with QPR before going to Sheffield Wednesday and winning 3-0. Of course Tyrese Campbell with a double, Tom Cannon with the 3rd in injury time to seal a 3-0 win over your rivals. And then a comfortable home win against Portsmouth, of course Sidney Peck with his first goal. And then a very good away day, Leicester away, the only one I went to this season. We went 2-0 up in 4 minutes, I could not believe what was going on. Sidney Peck in the 32nd minute scored a brilliant goal, edge of the box. With 3-0 up at half time, of course they get a couple of goals back in the second half, but it wasn't enough. And that win made it 3 wins in a row. And then at Bramall Lane, a comfortable 4-0 win against Stoke City. And with this form, you start to notice pattern, of course Patrick Bamford joined about this time. And there was definitely a correlation between him signing and our form getting better. We hit a little bump in the road, of course drawing to Norwich and losing to West Brom. And if I remember right, it was 2 quite poor performances as well. But then we'd go on to win 3 of the next 4, the only loss being Wrexham away 5-3. And it was looking like we could potentially push the playoffs. We're keeping quite consistent. But then of course a shock defeat in the FA Cup to Mansfield and then 2 1-0 losses away from home to Charlton and Southampton. It put a real spanner in the works and of course it was the start of the red card era. We picked up 6 red cards from the start of January till the end of the season, which is the most in the league. And of course 2 of them being at Charlton away, an absolute pathetic performance. But then we got back to a bit of decent form, of course 2 wins in the next 3 with that draw at Millwall. And a couple of decent results, especially that one against Ipswich, 3-1, quite comfortable. And it was kind of getting to that point now where we need to be absolutely perfect to try and get the playoffs. We lost a tight game against Middlesbrough before beating Portsmouth and Wednesday to do the double and relegate them. But then after a loss to Coventry and a defeat to QPR, of course our form was very, very patchy. After that win versus QPR, we'd only win 3, draw 3 and lose 5. And we really let the playoffs slip because of course a couple of more wins into the losses we could have got there. We finished 13th in the end. We had a mixed end to the season, of course 3 wins out of the last 5. But of course some poor performances like bottling a 3-1 lead against Swansea and of course Wrexham loss. And then the last 2 games at Bramall Lane, Blackburn and Preston were especially embarrassing. We finished the season the other day against Derby 2-1 away. And it was a brilliant performance and result against a team that could have got the playoffs. And I've got to say it was a very weird end to the season. The thing that cost us the most at the end of the season is of course the red card and conceding in the 45th to 60th minute. And we lost about 30 points from winning position, of course put half them away, you're in the playoffs. There was definitely some decent moments under Wilder since he came back, but of course there's been some bad moments as well. You can blame Sellers and the owners to a certain extent, but sometimes the responsibility has to be on Wilder as well, because some of the teams and some of the lineups are definitely good enough to be beating the teams we're playing. I can accept a lot of the players are quite poor. Of course, we'll look at the transfers in a minute, but sometimes Chris Wilder has to take some responsibility as well. And it's a big question at the moment. Are you Wilder in? Are you Wilder out? And I'm very much on the fence, of course, after the Blackburn and the Preston games. I wasn't so sure, but that win against Derby did reassure a lot of me. I thought he could be the man. It's going to be an interesting one in the summer, of course, with the parachute payments. We're not going to be able to sign too many players, and the players that we do sign are going to be low fees, frees and loans. But if I had to pick, I'm going to trust Chris Wilder. Of course, he can do well with low budgets, but I think he has to get off to a decent start next season, otherwise he could be on the chopping block. Now that we've broke down the season, let's have a look at some of these transfers and rank them. As you can see on the screen now, these are all the transfers that we've made through the season. There's 20 of them. I've ranked them 1 to 20, as you can see here. I'm not going to speak about everyone individually, as the video would be too long. I'll briefly mention the bottom 15, then talk about the top 5 in more detail. Starting off in 20, Ben Godfrey, he was quite poor. Got torn a new one in that Ipswich game by Jaden Philogene. He barely got seen since he went back in January, now in Denmark, I think. So that's all I've got to say about that one. And then, of course, in 19th and 18th, we've got Yukaki and Polendakov. 2 AI signings. They've not really played for the club. 1 Carabao Cup game, I think. I believe Polendakov is still at the club. Of course, Yukaki gone out on loan. I'd be very surprised if they actually played a competitive game for the club again, so they're going there. The next 2 places, a couple of failed loans. Of course, Yelder and Barry. Both of them played odd couple of times. Of course, Yelder's still at the club now. Barry got sent back in January. They both played a few games. Wasn't very inspiring. Not too much more to say. They're quite poor, so they're going there. Alex Matos in 15th. He's a permanent. He's very forgettable. He's barely played under Wilder. He's been in the reserves most of the time. He'll probably be gone in the summer. I can't see him playing again for Sheffield United again. So overall, he has to be this low. Calvin Phillips in 14th. Of course, he joined in January. Played about 2 or 3 games. Didn't look awful, but of course got that red card against Wednesday and an injury. He didn't play a game after that Wednesday one, so I can't rank him too high. There's been rumours we might go in for him again next season. I wouldn't mind it if he can stay fully fit, but with him, I think that's a massive if. Nils Zetterstrom in 13th is the weird one. Of course, he's permanent. He didn't play a game. And then he's gone out on loan to Genoa, of course, the Serie A side. He played 1 singular minute on his first game off the bench, but then after that, he's been on the bench every single game and not come on. So I don't really know what's gone off there. Of course, they've got the option to sign him permanently. I don't know why they would. He's only this high because he's got a bit of potential. Of course, we could sell him for a couple million maybe. But apart from that, he's literally shown nothing. A couple more average loans in 12th and 11th, of course, like Bene and Hoover. Both of them have shown a little bit of glimpses, but nothing much really. I'd say they've been a bit better than the likes of Barry, Hiala, Phillips, etc. But not by much. They've shown a little bit, but it's not enough. So I'd say they probably deserve to be in the middle of this list. In 10th somehow, Steve Chong, of course, the last couple of games, he's been alright. I mean, you know it's bad when he's on the list of 20 people, he's mid-table. Because we've got him from Luton, I'm not sure how much for. Apart from the last couple of games this season, he's not really shown much. Fair play to him, he seems to put the effort in, but it doesn't really result so much. So I can't really rank him any higher. In 9th, I've gone for Mark McGuinness purely because he's had more game time. First half of the season, he barely played. Second half, he's played a bit more. He's had a couple of games where he's actually looked alright next to Tanganga, but the most part, he's been quite poor. And I believe we signed him for quite a few million, so of course it's a bad transfer. But he's shown a bit more of a glimpse compared to some of the others, but it's not enough. Jibril Samara in 8th is such a weird one because of course he's been so patchy at times. He has a couple of decent games and he just has a bad game. Of course he's barely played it in this season. Them couple of good games have definitely pushed him up this list quite a bit, so it's 8th. In 7th is Ben Meehan. Say he barely played second half of the season, that's saying something. There's 2 reasons why he's so high on this list. Of course, the first one being the transfers in general are quite poor, but the second one is he was quite decent next to Tanganga for the first part of the season in that decent run of form. So you've got to give him a bit of credit for that. Of course, I don't know if something happened between him and Wilder towards the end of the season. Of course, he went to film that Sidemen video, whether that's got in the way of something, I don't know. But he never even seemed to get in match day squads when the likes of McGuinness was. In 6th is Danny Ings. Of course, not much game time, but he's actually been effective when he has played. He's got 2 or 3 goals to his name. He's been decent, looked lively. And I think he should have been used more, to be honest, because of course we see when he has chances, he usually puts them away. And I think especially when the likes of Tyrese Campbell and Tom Cannon weren't performing, of course he could have stepped in. Each one of them, he's probably leaving at the end of the season, it'd be quite forgotten. In 5th is Joe Rothwell. Of course, started off quite slow, but he's been decent last couple of games. And I think the main one with him is, of course, next season he's going to be much better because, of course, he'll get some match fitness. You've got to remember, he's playing these games when, of course, he didn't play much for Rangers at the first half. So, of course, he was always playing catch, but of course, he won't look sharp straight away. But he had a couple of games towards the end of the season where he looked alright, so it's 5. The last one I'm going to briefly touch on before talking about top 3 is, of course, 4th, which is Tyler Bindon. First half of the season, barely played, of course, quite poor under Sellers. But then second half of the season, he had like a redemption arc. Of course, he was quite solid alongside Tanganga. And a lot of weeks, he was definitely outperforming Tanganga, to be fair. If he'd have played like that whole season, he'd probably be in the top 3, but I just don't think I can justify it. Moving on to top 3, I'm going to talk more in detail about these now. And in 3rd, of course, is Japhet Tanganga. You might be thinking that's quite high, but I didn't have much choice there. Of course, with the low quality of our signings, I had to put Tanganga 3rd, really. In the first half of the season, though, it was quite deserved because he was one of our best players. He was actually looking quite solid, making block after block, tackle after tackle. But then something changed halfway through the season where his confidence and form just dropped. Second half of the season, he was quite clanky, made a mistake every single game nearly. I think a lot of it could be to do with the captain's armband. Of course, he might not be a leader. And I think that could be a heavy burden in terms of the way he plays. Of course, we spent a lot of money on him. Of course, he probably needs a better partner next to him. Next season is going to be an interesting one. I think he will get stripped of the captaincy. I can see Wilder in the summer signing some leaders, of course, giving one of them the captaincy. And hopefully he can thrive next season because, of course, we want to see some return of investment. Because we know how good he can be, of course, at Millwall and first half of the season with us. But it's just this second half of the season that's definitely let him down. In at number 2 is, of course, Jairo Riedewald. He's unlucky to miss out on one, but of course, number 1 has just just been so much better. And he definitely saved our season because, of course, he transformed that midfield. In the summer, when Vinny Souza left, of course, we were missing that replacement in the field like an anchor. And I've got to say, Riedewald slotted into that role nicely, played that role, not as good as Souza, but he's got some other qualities, better than Souza. But he's been that figure in the midfield that controls the tempo, of course, controls the game. And it's no surprise, a lot of the time when he goes off in the 60th minute, we can see goals. The only critique I've had, of course, I've just mentioned it, is the 60-minute thing. He seems to barely play full matches, only can play about 60, 70 before going off. So hopefully in the summer we can work on that fitness, try and get back up to 90. Because if we can have him for a full game every single week, then he'd be brilliant. But I've got to say, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing him more next season. But in at number 1, of course, it's going to be Patrick Bamford. Who else is it going to be? Of course, 12 goals in the Championship since he joined in November. And I've got to say, he definitely saved us from relegation, in my opinion. Of course, at the time, we were struggling for goals. Of course, Tyrese Campbell wasn't scoring as much. Tom Cannon and Danny Ings weren't scoring. So I think for Wilder to look at him, bring him on a free transfer, of course, it was a big risk, but it's a risk that paid off. Because, of course, he'd had problems with injuries in his career. We didn't know if he was going to be fit and ready. But straight away, hit the ground running, of course, a couple of goals in his first couple of months. And then at the last stage of the season, of course, he was just bagging for fun. Of course, 12 in total. He missed quite a few chances, but of course, he put a lot away as well, so he can be forgiven. But I've got to say, he definitely transformed our season. Of course, he's so solid leading that line, whether it's a 1 or a 2. Because I think he does work well alongside Tom Cannon, especially, to be honest. He's definitely better in a 2, in my opinion, of course, he's got someone else to feed off. Because he's not the quickest of players. He can't exactly run in behind every time. So if you put someone with a bit more pace next to him, of course, he thrives. And I'm very excited to see what he can do next season because, of course, in a half season, he got 12 goals. Can he get 15, 20 in a full one? Now that we've ranked the transfers, I'm going to give a few awards out. I'm going to give 3 awards out. Player of the season, goal of the season, and most improved. Getting straight into the player of the season, it's quite obviously Callum O'Hare. There's a few names that could have got it, maybe like Gustavo Harmer, Femi Siriki, Andre Brooks. But I think Callum O'Hare this season has been so good, especially in that mid part of the season. Of course, last season, he didn't get many goals and assists, but he was still decent for the team. But this season, he's still been decent with the team, and of course, he's got the goals and assists as well. Of course, 9 goals, 7 assists, so 16 goal involvements. And I've got to say, he's been brilliant this year because he's so energetic, like a Duracell bunny. And I've got to say, he's been so brilliant in that number 10 position, of course, creating chances for fun. And it's the work that he does off the ball as well, because of course, he gives 100% effort and energy into the game. And I've got to say, he's been brilliant to watch this season. It'll be interesting to see what happens next year, because of course, Gus Harmer could be leaving. And if he does leave, we'll probably sign a more out-and-out left winger rather than like an inverted one, which will probably give Callum O'Hare more freedom, more roaming space in that attacking mid spot. Because you saw in the mid part of the season when Harmer wasn't playing how good he was in that midfield spot. Of course, Harmer starts out wide, likes to drift into the same space as Callum O'Hare. Sometimes it's a problem, sometimes it does help us. But I've got to say, if Gus Harmer does leave, which he probably will, it'll be interesting to see Callum O'Hare in that number 10 spot more often. Moving on to the goal of the season, another one real option here, Gus Harmer against Birmingham. Of course, just past the halfway line, he sees James Beadle off his line, of course, chips him. And I've got to say, it's a brilliant goal. Of course, he scored a couple of other contenders. The one against Portsmouth was very close, but I think the one against Birmingham is just a bit better. You've got some other contenders, such as Harmer against Mansfield, of course, Peck against Derby and Leicester. And of course, not forgetting Femi Siriki's brilliant effort from the edge of the box against Stoke. There's quite a few contenders, but I think the halfway line definitely takes it. I think it's one of the things that only Gus Harmer would attempt in this team. He's provided some brilliant moments this season, of course, that goal being one of them. And we know how good he is, so of course, next year will be a massive miss if he does leave. And then the final award I'm giving out is most improved. It's going to Femi Siriki. There's a couple of contenders, such as Brooks and Peck, of course, the younger side of things. But I think Femi Siriki has nailed down that right back spot this year has been so impressive. Last year, he was getting rotated with the likes of Chowdhury and Gilchrist. But this season, of course, after the failed experiments of the likes of Godfrey at right back, of course, he's nailed down that right back spot to a T. And I've got to say, being so brilliant this year down that right hand side, of course, that connection with Andre Brooks. And I've got to say, so tenacious, gives 100% effort and energy every single game. Of course, 1 goal and 5 assists. Of course, he's not many, but it's still a decent amount of assists and goals, to be fair. But of course, past the goals and assists, if you look at stuff like fouls, when he's won so many fouls this year, and he's a very tricky player. Of course, he can underlap and overlap with Andre Brooks. So hopefully, we can keep him this summer and definitely build around him. And there we go, guys. That's my review of the 25-26 season with Sheffield United. Thank you very much for the support this year on my TikTok, on my Instagram, and on here. Of course, I've only been doing YouTube for half a season, but I've done TikTok for a full season now. The support has been immense. Of course, I can't wait for next year to start already. So thank you very much for the support, whether it's a like, follow, share, subscribe, comment, whatever. It's greatly appreciated on my journey, so thank you very much. And if you aren't subscribed already, what are you waiting for? As always, link to my socials in the caption. Go and follow them as well. And if you're a Sheffield United fan, let me know in the comments your thoughts on this season. I'm interested to get other opinions, as many as I can. Of course, I want to see what other people think. And all that's left to say now is I'll see you guys in the next one.